and hit record. So mental health is all about cultivating your mental well-being. And as a wellness class educator, as a registered nurse, and as a certified health and life coach, that is something I'm really passionate about. So I've listed my contact information for you here. And if I can ever be of help to you, or if you have questions and want to reach out, please feel free to send me an email and I'll be happy to answer those questions. I also want to make sure that you have plenty of opportunity for that today. With so many of you on the call, I know that you all come to this webinar with different goals and different expectations. And so I want to make sure that this is a class that's really helpful for you. So if you have questions or topics in mind that you're hoping we're covering today, please feel free to either put that as a question in the Q&A. You have the option of making that anonymous if you'd like. And you also have the option of posting publicly or privately in the chat. So please feel free to use those options, because I definitely want to make sure that this is something that feels really relevant and helpful to you. Before we get started, I want to make sure that you're aware of some of our wonderful programming this semester. So we have the Crimson Couch to 5K training program that kicked off this week, and there's still time for you to join us. It's just about you creating a wellness team, a team that would walk and really help encourage each other to participate in the Crimson Couch to 5K or 10K race. That's going to be virtually the first week in April. And then we also have some Move Spring challenges that are going on both in February and continuing on in March. And we are starting our Wellbeing health screenings this week. So lots of fun, exciting things coming your way from the Wellbeing programming, and we'd love to have you participate. So when we talk about mental health, it's really important, especially for my nursing background, that we talk about when it's time to seek professional help. And so if you have, times where you're feeling overly sad or anxious or angry, or you're overwhelmed or just not yourself, if you're feeling like the things that you normally use to help you cope aren't helping, if you've had a recent loss, maybe you've lost someone, maybe you've had another major loss in your life, you could be dealing with grief. And so we want to make sure that that's something that we're, really aware of and cognizant of. Maybe you've had a recent trauma or major life event, or you've stopped really enjoying things that you normally do. We want to make sure that you're really, aware of those things that could potentially be impacting your mental health. And we want to encourage you to seek help for anything that you might need support with. So today's class is really about awareness and resources, but we want you to know that there's so many ways that you can get help, especially as a University of Alabama employee. We have so many great opportunities and resources on campus. So we have the EAP, which is a wonderful resource for counseling. So there are available providers in network here in Tuscaloosa. There's a 24/7 wellness support chat. There's also the AmericanBehavioral.com site where you can have a member login, and that information's there. There's also a hotline that you can call. And then, of course, there is an American Behavioral newsletter and a wellness newsletter that goes out every month to the UA listserv, as well as lots of other resources that are available nationally. And some are listed here for you, and others can be accessed at the CDC site. So the main thing is that if you do feel like that you need some extra support with your mental health, that you feel encouraged and empowered to go and get that help. So today's focus is really going to be on controlling what you can control. In a world where we are constantly bombarded with stressors and challenges and a pandemic, it's so important that we recognize the things that we can control and the things that we can't. And so I put together, these are four of my favorite graphics, that I put together this graphic to really be a source of encouragement and a reminder to you that we can only control so much. And it's really the important things that we can control that we should focus on. So in the first graphic, it talks about, the goal is not to get rid of all of your negative thoughts. And that's so true. When we talk about stress, especially when we think about mental health, we often talk about stress as if we shouldn't have any stress. And that's not realistic. pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, there's going to be stress, right? That's just part of the human experience. And it's so important that we normalize that stress is okay. It's that when stress becomes debilitating or starts to impact your life in more negative ways, that's when we need to really get a hold of it. But we're not going to be able to be completely, stress-free or negative, thought-free. That's just not possible. And so we really want to control our reactions to our stressors more so than trying to control the stress itself. And so we don't want to worry about things that we can't control. And we want to really focus on the things that we can control, like our attitude and our actions, our behaviors, the people that we follow on social media, the people that we unfollow, the things that we consume, not just in terms of our food, but in terms of information, in terms of our spending and our resources. There's so many things that we consume on a daily basis that can impact our overall mental well-being. We want to really think about our personal boundaries and how we can set those and reinforce those. And then we want to think about how we speak to ourselves, how we think about ourselves, and how we, speak and think about other people as well. And then, because I love a good Venn diagram, this last image is, a kind of collection of the things that matter and the things that we can control. And where those two overlap in this Venn diagram is where we should really focus our attention, because there are things that we can control that absolutely, in the grand scheme of things, do not matter, right? And there are things that really do matter, that are important, that we have absolutely no control over. And so where we really want to focus our time and our attention and our energy is on those things that we have some control over and the things that actually matter. Because otherwise we're really, getting into a point of overwhelm when we try to control all of the things all of the time, because that's just not possible. So when we think about health, health is not just the absence of disease. Health is really a more holistic approach. And we want to make sure that we're, taking care of ourselves, mind, body, and spirit, because those things work together. It's not just about, calories in, calories out, move your body and be, physically healthy, but we truly need to take care of our mental well-being, our spiritual health, etc. And I see something in the chat, so I'm going to check. Okay. Yes. Hello, Brandy. Nice to see you. So definitely think about this definition. All the way back to 1942, the World Health Organization has been telling us that health is not just the absence of disease. And so I want you to think about that. We've known for a really long time that holistic approach to, to healthcare and to wellness is important, but we haven't always emphasized that. So when we think about mental health, of course, we have to talk about mental illnesses. And unfortunately, 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 adults experience some type of mental health issue, challenge, or illness in their lifetime. And so, 1 to 4 or 1 to 5 is the common statistic that you'll see. And then nearly 1 in 25 adults will experience a serious mental illness. And so the 1 in 4 or the 1 in 5, those, illnesses, we're thinking more of, mild depression, mild anxiety, maybe, some mood disorders, things of that nature. The more serious mental illnesses that this graphic is referencing is really things like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder and that sort of thing. So for today's talk, we are really wanting to talk about stress management and how stress management can impact our overall mental health and how we can start to control for some of those things, because we know that in the middle of a pandemic, it's very difficult sometimes for us to separate out the responsibilities that we have, the overwhelm that we feel. And, if you already have an existing mental health concern like anxiety or depression, which many of us do in the US, then that can just be exacerbated. So what I always tell my students when I talk to them about mental health, because that's my area of specialty, is I tell our students, the pandemic has really brought forth things and amplified things that were already there. And certainly there's some new issues coming up as well. But a lot of times when we have periods of stress, and a pandemic is a big stressor for us, we're actually just amplifying, problems or situations that were already existing that maybe we were just able to manage a little bit better. And so I want y'all to kind of think about that. How has this last year really called upon your resources? And maybe you're just feeling a little depleted. I think we all are. After about 6 months of being in a stressful situation, our bodies really start to show the signs of wear and tear. After about 6 months, our body really depletes its reserves. So if you kind of gotten to that 6-month mark back in the fall where you were just really tired and just not feeling like you could carry on, and like you were becoming a little more overwhelmed with the pandemic and all of the other day-to-day stressors that we typically have, that's because we hit that 6-month mark and we were just really tired and depleted. And so you may still be feeling that right now. It can take a long time to recover. So I just want you to be encouraged that you're probably not alone in feeling that way, but many of us have gotten to the point that we feel like we are needing to move on, that this is not just a temporary situation, but that we're having to really figure out how we can do our day-to-day every day without having some of the concessions that we had early on. So if you're feeling that way, just know that you're not alone. So some common mental health conditions, I mentioned a few of these, but stress can really impact our mental health. PTSD and trauma, we often think about PTSD just being, kind of a representation that we see commonly is, our veteran population who have seen combat. But we know that PTSD can tap into anyone. Childhood events, adverse childhood events, certainly, and trauma certainly can be something that leads to PTSD. And so we know that that's a really common disorder for people. And PTSD is not a true mental health disorder in the sense that there, is a brain chemistry component, but it's more that life events have caused this trauma. And so it's treated a little bit differently because of that reason. Grief certainly can take a toll on our mental health, and we certainly have seen that this past year. And I feel like that we often don't allow ourselves time to grieve. We, have short bereavement periods. We take a few days to, go through the rituals of grief, especially if we've lost a loved one. But there are many forms of grief and loss that we don't always acknowledge. And so a lot of times we have complicated grieving from that reason. Of course, bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, personality disorders, phobias, and substance abuse or addictions are all going to be more of those severe mental health conditions. And some of you may be facing some of these, and some of you, may have loved ones that are, really, kind of dealing with some of these issues. And so we know that that certainly impacts, our communities and our families and friends. And so if we are not impacted by mental health, we certainly, or mental illness, we certainly know others of, our community and our loved ones who are. So we're all touched in some way. And when we think about mental health factors, whether it's a clinical diagnosis of a mental health issue or illness, or whether we're just talking about cultivating good mental health, which we're going to get to, we know that there are hereditary factors, environmental, situational influences, physical factors, and traumatic experiences that all can play a role. And so, it's not just that you have, a predisposition because of, genetics, but we know that our environment and our experiences certainly play a role. And so when we think about mental health care, there are many ways that we can seek treatment. Of course, we typically think about a psychiatrist and psychologist. We think about licensed counselors or therapists, but also there are coaches, so health and life coaches who specialize in mental health support. And so we know that these are important things to mention to people because when you're seeking health care, it's important that you seek someone who's able to support your health holistically. And certainly your primary care physician is a part of that role as well. So definitely, seek out resources when you need a little extra support. I love the opportunity to talk about mental health and to normalize the conversation, because the more that we talk about mental health and the more that we talk about seeking help when we need that support, the more that we can really end the stigma that surrounds mental health care. And I'm very passionate about that. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything in the chat. Yeah, so we talked about COVID deaths with family and friends and delayed grieving. Absolutely. And while we're in the middle of a trauma, I'll just take a moment to acknowledge that, because I think, probably many of us are in that situation. I know that I certainly have lost friends and family this year related to COVID. And, it is difficult. And, when we're in the middle of a stressful event where we're having this collective trauma, which we all are, right? If we're really acknowledging our feelings, we're all going through this collective trauma together. With the pandemic, if we are still kind of in that survival mode ourselves of making sure that, we're keeping up with everything. Maybe you have people you're caregiving for, maybe you have kids, you're trying to do your work, maybe you're doing graduate school or what have you, and you've got those everyday stressors, and you're just trying to survive, the pandemic with mask wearing and social distancing, and you experience loss on top of that, then you certainly can have, complicated or delayed grieving because you're just in survival mode. And so when you come out of survival mode, it may be that the grief really hits you in a different way than it had in the immediate. So just be aware of that, 6 months from now, a year from now, when kind of the world goes back to some semblance of normalcy, you may have a moment where you kind of grieve or revisit the grief that you had, and it may surprise you. And that's not uncommon in just everyday life without the context of the pandemic, but I certainly think that we're going to see some complicated grieving because of that. And I know it's very difficult. I lost my uncle in November to COVID-19. And so I know how difficult that can be. And my sympathies are with all of you who have been impacted as well. So when we think about access, we know that we are really lacking the resources that we need, particularly in rural areas. There's a profound shortage of mental health care workers, particularly psychiatrists, and they have a really important role because of their ability to prescribe medications, which many people need to be able to treat their mental health. So we know that many counties don't even have a psychiatrist in that county, so they may have to go to a neighboring county. And there are about 111 million people who live in a shortage area. And so just calling your attention to these numbers, because we are very fortunate in Tuscaloosa County to have more resources than the typical rural area would have in Alabama. And so we definitely want to promote the wonderful resources that we do have because they are, more sparsely, kind of distributed across the country, particularly in rural areas. So it's really important that we challenge any negative beliefs that we have about mental health and its treatment, and that we really create awareness and seek to really normalize the conversation, like I said. And when we seek, medical care for a physical illness or ailment, we don't think twice about sharing that. But when we need to seek care for mental health challenges, we often feel some embarrassment or some shyness around that. So that can be hard, but I think it's important for you to find someone who is trusted, not only as a professional who can help you, but also someone in your life who can listen to you and provide you some support. And I think, having a positive mindset is really important. We're going to talk more about that to give you some practical tools to support your well-being. But I want to make sure that you know that I don't mean toxic positivity where we tell you that everything is going to be okay and we offer you, false hope and reassurance, because there are times where things just don't feel okay. And, it's not okay in the moment for you because what you're feeling is really real. We're humans and we're designed to feel emotions. It's important that we have a positive mindset, but not to the point that we, are negating the human experience. And then we're going to talk about how we can create a mental health wellness plan and talk about some self-care and stress management strategies, because a lot of times we talk about the problems, but we don't talk about the solutions. And I like to have a really practical approach that we really discuss, okay, what are some things that we can do to make life feel a little easier? And, for any of you who don't know me, I am the person who I really teach on what I need to hear. And so for all of the classes that I teach for Wellbeing, I love to talk about the ones where it's healthy habits and stress management and overall wellness, because I need to hear those same things too. So we all need reminders. For me, stress, can get very technical because with healthcare and nursing, my background in all of that, there are so many definitions that you could use to define stress, but we know stress when we see it and when we feel it, right? And it's really, I think, the lack of tools and resources to overcome the demands and pressures that we feel. And so I included this here because I think this is just a really practical way to talk about stress. So then if we think about stress in this way, we can really interrupt the stress by, equipping you with more tools and more resources to cope well, and by reprioritizing our lives and our schedules to take some of those demands and pressures away. So we all know what stress is, but I want to call your attention to kind of the fight, flight, or freeze response. And there's actually more responses to stress than these top three, but we usually only talk about fight or flight, right? We think about this image here on the PowerPoint. We think about the saber-toothed tiger, right? In prehistoric days where, the tiger comes at us and we either try to fight it off or we try to, run away, we flee, right? So fight or flight. But what I would say that we probably do more of than anything is I think we freeze. So when we say things like, I feel so overwhelmed, or I feel stuck, or I just don't know what to do, that is really our freeze response coming into play, So we don't often turn around and fight and face our fears. And sometimes we don't even have enough energy, to be honest with you, to even run away from our problems. Sometimes we just feel paralyzed, and it's that freeze response. And so I want to really call your attention to that, because when we think about taking control and we think about managing our stress well, action is really what you need to take in order to overcome this stress response. And that feels really antithetical to what we are typically taught to do, right? We're taught to think about things. We're taught to, research things. We're taught to, pause and kind of go through all of this, cognitive stuff, where we're taught to do those things first and then to take action, right? That's the responsible thing to do. But when it comes to stress, and when it comes to motivation, and when it comes to discipline, those are things that really require action. And so when we feel like we're stuck or overwhelmed or paralyzed, we really need to take action. And it doesn't mean to do something, risky, or to do something that, it requires a lot of resources or energy, but it just means taking that first step to getting unstuck. And so when I think about stress management, that's the kind of action I'm talking about. What are some good coping strategies that as soon as you're hit with a stressor, instead of freezing, you can kind of automatically say, you know what? I'm feeling stressed right now. Here's what I'm going to do. I have my emergency checklist of things that I can do that when I'm feeling stressed, I can turn to this list and I can do those things. And that's what we're going to create today. So we talk about things all the time: food, exercise, stress, as being good or bad. We give a label or a moral value to everything sometimes in our culture. And so we think of stress as being good or bad. We think of food as being good or bad. And really, a lot of times, stress is just neutral and it's just necessary. And food can be neutral and just necessary. So instead of thinking about stress being good or bad, I want you to really think about it as just being something that is necessary for you to develop the skills that you need. So we know that moderate levels of stress actually may improve your performance and your efficiency. We know that if you don't have enough stress, it can lead to boredom and it can lead to some poor health outcomes. But then we know on the reverse of that, too much stress can cause a lot of anxiety. You can be unproductive, you can feel paralyzed, and you can have some poor mental health effects. And so you want to strike just the right balance for you, and that balance is going to look different for everyone on this call. So we know some negative effects of stress. Obviously, we know it takes a toll on us physically and emotionally. And I just listed this here for you because I think it's important to remind ourselves of the effects of the stress that we deal with every day. But we also want to talk about the unhealthy coping strategies that sometimes develop. You know, we talk about coping really well with our stress, but we often don't think about that we can have, adaptive or maladaptive coping. So adaptive or more positive coping would be that we meditate, that we exercise, that we call a friend. But we can have unhealthy coping mechanisms too, or maladaptive coping, where we use things to self-medicate, like alcohol or food, or drugs, or medications, or things that we're not using appropriately. So there's lots of ways we can self-medicate with coffee and a donut. There are lots of things that we can use that aren't as healthy. And so we really want to focus on, what are the healthy things that are going to make me feel good and make me feel better at the end of the day. So it's really important that we actually identify our stressors. If you're like me, you walk around saying that you're stressed all the time, right? I'm going to have my hand up. But when people ask us what are we stressed about, sometimes we're just like everything feels stressful. And that's not as helpful when we think about it, because there are things that stress us out more than others, right? And so, if you're, at home during dinner time and someone drops a plate of food, that is stressful for sure, because it's an inconvenience. You're having to clean something up. But that's not nearly as stressful as, getting, an email at work that's, going to cause you some, extra steps on a project, or setbacks on a project, right? So we naturally know that some things are more stressful than others. And it often depends on the situation, the context, and maybe even the day, like how much sleep we got, how much food we had that day. And so being able to identify our stressors and kind of being able to rank them of, how stressful is this? How frequently does this stressor happen? Can be really helpful in determining how we're going to approach our stress. So when you think about stressors, those are any things that are causing you to have a stress response, and that cascade of hormones that happens when we feel stressed. It's that feeling that you have when you have to slam on your brakes to keep from hitting someone when you're driving your car. We have that sensation all of the time to stress. It's just that sometimes we're not paying enough attention to realize it. And it's maybe not to the same degree that you have it when you're in that situation. But every time you're feeling stressed, you have a ding or a bell or a notification on your phone or on your email, or you get a stressful call or something like that. We're having that same stress response. You just may not feel it to that extent. And so that's when we really want to make sure that our stressors are minimized as much as we can. So stressors for you could run the gamut, right? And I'm sure there are many more than those listed here. But I just put a few common ones. Financial or legal trouble. Relationships can always be stressful, right? And sometimes it's positive stress. Sometimes the birth of a family member, a promotion, those are happy reasons to be stressed, but it still can be stressful. Of course, our health and wellness can cause that stress if we're not meeting the goals that we want. our environment, our living situation, the pandemic. There's so many stressors. So I want you to just take time to think about your individual stressors and think about what your triggers are. So for me, I can give you an example. I have young school age children. Dinner time is a really stressful occasion sometimes to make sure that we're getting food on the table, that everything is ready, that we have enough food, that it's warm, that, it's something all of the kids will like. The dog might be barking, the phone might be ringing. It can be really chaotic at dinner time when you have a young family. And so my stressor might be family dinner time, but my trigger of that stress might be, that something burned, or that something dropped on the floor, or that the dog barked, or, the doorbell rang. Like, those are more of the triggers around that situation. And so when you identify those, you can start to avoid or, kind of limit those triggers, right? And so it might be that you turn your phone off before dinner time. It might be that you put your dog in the kennel or in the backyard. It might be that you set the plates out on the table so that there's no, plates that have to be transferred from the kitchen to the table. There are different things that you can do to kind of avoid or limit those triggers. But what I find often is we get into this habit of we do things the same way every day without really consciously thinking about it. And our habits are so ingrained. Those kind of get formed, in when they're very concrete, they get formed in a part of the brain that requires us to kind of automate it, right? We don't have to think about it. They're just unconscious decisions kind of in your basal ganglia. And so that's why you can drive home after work and you get home and you don't really remember all of the details about driving home. It's because your brain just takes over and just kind of in autopilot drives you home. It's why you sometimes end up in a drive-through that you didn't mean to go to because it's just a part of your routine, right? So when we have these habits around dinner time, that might be a stressful time, but we tend to kind of do the same things we've always done. So if you get upset about the dog barking and the food falling on the floor and all of those things, you live that out every day until you intentionally interrupt that and form a new habit. And so sometimes we get into this cycle of just doing the hard thing over and over because our brains would rather do the pattern than to interrupt that pattern and try something new, even though in the long run, that might be easier. So as you jot down your stressors and triggers, I'd like for you to think about that dinner time example of how can you then walk out the things in your life that you could interrupt and intentionally change. So if you can avoid the triggers, that's the best. But if you could just limit those, that would even be helpful kind of on your journey. And then incorporating self-care and stress management strategies will really help you cope with the things that you can't control. So when we think about the benefits of stress management, they're pretty obvious. You would feel better physically and mentally. Your emotions would, kind of even out. You might feel more positive, happier, more optimistic, and your productivity, your, happiness, your, ability to focus, your ability to learn and achieve, all of those things that we're really striving for would all improve if we could just cope and manage our stress a little more proactively. And so when we think about our stressors and triggers and knowing what those are, sometimes it might mean that we need to talk to someone. We might need a professional counselor or a neutral party to listen to us because the people in our lives aren't always neutral and they have stake in the stress that you have. And so talking to your spouse or partner or best friend even might not be as helpful for you as talking to someone who's a neutral party. Always make sure that you're partnering with your healthcare providers to guide your care, because sometimes we're having mental health exacerbations and there's a physical or medical reason for that. It might be that you're having fluctuations in your blood sugar or dehydration, chronic dehydration. Those are two things that can cause a physiological, anxiety for you. And so taking a mental health approach to anxiety, if it's truly because you're having a physical, mental kind of connection there, you're needing to kind of get your blood sugar under control and make sure that you're getting good hydration. That's not going to be as helpful for you if you're not actually getting to the root cause of what's causing that anxiety. And so it's really important that you work with all of your providers to make sure that you're not missing something if you are struggling with some mental health challenges. You also want to make sure that self-care is more than just chocolates and wine and bath bombs and, those sorts of things. The things that we typically see promoted as self-care. Those definitely can be. They're treats and that's great. But self-care is really about making space for doing the things that are important to you and making sure that you're able to, have the kind of rest that you need, because a lot of times we reward ourselves on the weekends while we're burning ourselves out through the week. And so our reward for, high productivity and over, kind of committing ourselves throughout the week, it should not be, the kind of self-care model that we talk about sometimes, where we're like, okay, I'm going to do all of those things, but on the weekend, I'm going to have a bath and I'm going to get to eat some chocolate and everything's fine. And that's self-care, because that's not the kind of self-care that's going to be really life-giving and helpful for you in the long term. And then making connections and building relationships, I think, are so important. Loneliness is at an all-time high, and it was even before the pandemic, because you can be lonely and still be surrounded by people. We're seeing that social media is really taking a toll on people's mental health, again, even before COVID-19, because we're just seeing the highlight reel. We're not seeing the behind the scenes. And so everything is perfectly, filtered and placed and cultivated, and we're not seeing, the kind of the blooper reel, right? We're not seeing where people are failing or where people are struggling. And so we can really tend to have this image that everyone else is perfect and we're the only ones struggling. And that's not true. For most people, well over 50% of people who access social media, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, all of those popular ones, have symptoms of depression after they exit the app. And they didn't have those feelings prior to getting on the app and scrolling. And it's because we do have this kind of fear of missing out and this comparison that makes it really difficult for us to manage those expectations. So again, ask for help as soon as you know you need it, and ask for help as often as you need it. And then let's together start normalizing taking care of ourselves. So managing stress, again, when we think about how we can start to make this possible, we need to really change our perceptions and our expectations of ourselves and others, and really start to make this be something we do every day. So set realistic goals and expectations, have tough conversations, try to avoid procrastination. When you see a stressor or trigger, try to intentionally interrupt that. Set good boundaries for yourselves and for others. If we have trouble setting boundaries with ourselves around, social media or negative self-talk, we're going to have a really hard time of setting boundaries with others. So practice with setting boundaries with yourself first. Try to know your values and beliefs and not compromise those. Schedule time for yourself to just take a break. We are not designed to hit the alarm clock in the morning and then go, go, go all day until we go to bed at night. That's just not how we're designed to live, but that is how we live. So you want to schedule at least 10 or 15-minute breaks in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening, just to close your eyes and take a minute to breathe, right? It could be meditation, it could be quiet time, but it's not time to, check in with someone or to scroll social media. It's really time to just unplug and take a breather. You can listen to music, that can be really helpful. Getting outside and doing anything, physically in nature, whether it's gardening or, it's yoga or walking in the park, are all great ways to meditate, get movement in, and get outside and kind of reset our circadian rhythms. And then finding a hobby that you really enjoy. A lot of times once we get into our lives that are pretty settled, right? We've graduated from school, we're in committed relationships, maybe we have children or we don't have children, we, have our degrees, we can really get into this monotony of not doing new things, right? And so think about before COVID, when is the last time you tried something new? And for some of you, you might be trying new things all the time. But for a lot of us, when I ask people, a year or 2 years ago, they really hadn't gone and tried something new, a new restaurant, a new hobby, in a really long time. And so that can be something that could really help support better stress management, something to look forward to. Again, these are some other great ones. Again, meditation I think is just the best because it really does help the brain. I think meditation is for the mind what sleep is for the body. It really helps reset. And then relaxation exercises and guided imagery. Our breathing oftentimes can get out of sync with our bodies, and we can have anxiety if we start to breathe too fast. And so there's a method called boxed breathing, and you can Google that. And there are some great resources online and even apps that you can download that walk you through guided imagery and breathing techniques to really help the body progressively relax. And that can be great in terms of, really engaging your nervous system and resetting it. So some self-care and stress management strategies. I really think it all starts with mindset. Carol Dweck is pictured here in her TED Talk, The Power of Believing That You Can Improve. And this TED Talk is amazing. She has done phenomenal work and foundational work on mindset. And so I would recommend anything that she does, any of her TED Talks, any of her books, because if you can fix your mindset, you really can start to lay a foundation for health and wellness. So another great TED Talk is How to Make Stress Your Friend. Kelly McGonigal, she does an amazing job of explaining why stress is necessary and how it can be neutral in your life. And both of those TED Talks are pretty short. And then I always like to talk about wellness basics because I find that people really who are struggling with their mental health are really struggling in other areas too. And so when we think about, if you're familiar with stacked stones called Karens, there is this model with mind, body, and soul of these stacked stones. And that when you have stacked stones and you bump them, the ones on top are usually the first to fall. And so your mental and physical health are usually those top stones. And so when you get out of balance, those top stones are usually going to be your physical health and your mental health. And so when you're not sleeping well, you're not hydrated well, you're not eating a healthy plate of food, you're not moving your body every day, you're not meditating, those are the wellness basics or your 5 to thrive. So if you're not doing those things and you're trying to get a hold of your productivity at work or your parenting or your stress management or your mental health, it's going to be really hard for you to get a hold of that because you're not doing the basics that you need to do to really survive and thrive well, right? And so that's why I have this GPS pin here, to indicate this is where you need to start. If everything feels like it's hard, if you feel like you're kind of living your life with your hair on fire or all of the, dash panel lit up in your car, if you're kind of in that mode of stress, then start here. And I would say the thing that I would start with is to start with hydration first, because sleep is the foundation of health, but you have so many factors that impact whether you sleep well or not. I feel like the easiest of the 5 of these is to stay hydrated, and it's going to have the most impact the quickest. So if you can drink about half your body weight in ounces a day, typically 64 ounces is not enough for most people. Start with hydration. And then when you start with hydration, then start making sure that you're eating more vegetables, half of your plate in veggies a day, and eat the rainbow. Start trying to go to bed a little bit earlier, right? Try not to sleep in late on the weekends because that messes up your sleep cycle or your circadian rhythm. Try to move your body every day. And that might be a dance party in your kitchen while you're cooking supper tonight. It doesn't have to be extravagant. It doesn't have to be a fancy, gym membership or, a fancy workout routine. It could just be taking a walk around the block with your kids or your spouse or your partner. And then start to meditate 3 to 5 minutes a day. And that could be listening to music. It could just be, cutting the lights down low and sitting for a few minutes. It could be listening to a guided meditation on an app. There are so many ways to make that accessible. It doesn't have to be expensive or complicated to kind of get these wellness basics down. And so do one of these at a time until you feel really good about each of these, and then start building in more of those stress and coping techniques that I've shared, and I'm going to share some more. So I've kind of given this as a checklist. We talk about quality and quantity of sleep. We usually talk about just get 7 to 8 hours, but quality of sleep matters. Being in bed by 10 is so important. You're going to have real mental health symptoms if you're not getting enough sleep. After 2 weeks, you can start to have delirium and hallucinations, and just really see poor health effects on your mental status if you're not sleeping well. Maybe start a power down hour around 9 so that you can get in bed by 10. Try to limit your blue light exposure after 9, and try to keep your room cool, dark, and quiet. That's going to really help your sleep. So it's not just that you got 7 or 8 hours that matters. It matters that you've gotten good quality sleep. If you're not sleeping and not in bed by 10 p.m., then you're missing the restorative sleep cycle that your body naturally has between 10 p.m. and midnight. And I'm a night owl, so this is hard for me to say because I like to stay up late. But if you're not in bed by 10 getting good quality sleep, then your body's not getting the true restorative sleep that it needs, most likely. And then, of course, we know that, too much sleep can be, harmful, and too little sleep can be harmful to your body. So you need to kind of see, what works best for you. Hydration, again, drinking half your body weight in ounces per day. Make sure you set a goal for yourself and track your water intake. That's going to be the best way that you know how much water you particularly need. If water is not a habit for you, then start making it something that you stack with another habit. So if you brush your teeth, routinely, then stack the habit that you go fill up your water bottle in the morning. Or if you go and get a coffee every day, which I love, then make sure that you also get a water when you get your coffee. And so build that into your routine. Always have your water bottle with you, and try to make drinking water fun. So infuse it with fruit and herbs and vegetables and things, whatever you need to do to make water fun. Cucumbers, strawberries, citrus fruits are all great ways to make water fun. And again, when you have chronic dehydration or sleep problems, you're going to see mental and physical effects of that. And then healthy plate, you want to make sure that you're eating the rainbow. A lot of times we only eat beige foods or brown foods. And if we want to be really healthy, we'll eat green. But you really need to eat the whole rainbow of colors, because you're going to miss out on antioxidants if not. Each color of the fruits and vegetables have a different set of, minerals and nutrients and antioxidants. So if you're missing a color, you're missing those nutrients in your diet. You want to try to avoid inflammatory foods like dairy and gluten and soy and nuts. Know your intolerances and food sensitivities, because we're all different. So I don't believe in saying that one food is healthy and one isn't. Broccoli is really good for you. It's a healthy, good food, right? That's what we tell people, but some people can't eat cruciferous vegetables. If you have certain GI problems, diverticulitis, if you have Crohn's disease, there are certain fruits and vegetables that you can't eat. So healthy is not a one size fits all. You'll, of course, want to make sure that you move every day. Yoga, Pilates, walking, dancing, stretching. These are all great ways to incorporate movement without it being expensive or hard. And so definitely think about how you can incorporate movement into your everyday, even, like I said, if it's just a dance party. With movement, you really get a release of good, hormones like, a reduction of your stress hormones, a reduction of your adrenaline, and then an increase in your dopamine. And so you really can see good impact on your health and on your wellness just by moving your body. And mindfulness and meditation, again, I've mentioned some of these, but just try to be present in the moment. I am someone who thinks a lot about the future. I'm kind of a future-oriented person. You can be a present-oriented person, a future-oriented person, or a past-oriented person. And I am more of a future-oriented person. I tend to, worry more and have some anxiety. That's really typical of a future-oriented person. People who are more past-oriented typically have more kind of depressive symptoms. And people who are in the present tend to have a little bit more of a balance between the two. And so I have really started repeating the mantra over the last few years of being present where my feet are. So many times we're present in a room, but our brains are somewhere else, particularly because we've really promoted that multitasking is a skill that we want people to have, and our brains aren't really designed to multitask. And so we've been trained to be excited about our ability to multitask, and really we're not good at it, right? That's not something that we are really designed to do. And so something that helps me is it helps me to remember to be present in the moment by telling myself, be present where my feet are. So whatever room I'm in, whatever space I'm in, I need to be present there instead of on my phone or in my head about stuff. And that really helps me, kind of reset and recenter and kind of get back to the important things. Another tool that I want to really introduce you to is this positive framing technique. So it can be positive framing or positive reframing, just depends on how you're using it. But it's a great tool to use with self-reflection or journaling. And so this is a tool that I find particularly useful for people who have anxiety or who become overwhelmed with stress. We oftentimes tell people to just get over something. It's kind of that, just pat statement that we tell people, oh, we'll just be more positive or just don't worry about that. And I'm not the kind of person that can take that and run with it, right? I need a tool. I need to be taught how to do that. And so I searched for a lot of years, at least 5 years plus. How can I just be more positive? Because some people have more of a challenge with that than others. Some people are just magically more positive people. They tend to just have a different outlook on life, and that's not my gift, right? And so I try really hard to find practical resources. So instead of telling you to just be more positive, think about a hard situation. Maybe it's I'm trying to parent in the middle of a pandemic, or I'm trying to work in the middle of a pandemic, whatever it is. I'm trying to go to school in the middle of a pandemic. When we think our circumstances are hard, when we have a thought that my life is so hard, our feelings follow those thoughts, right? And it sometimes feels overwhelming. And so the actions that we have then can be that we don't do anything, right? We don't act, we feel stuck, we have that freeze response. And so the result is that our life is actually stressful because we're not doing the things we need to do to kind of get unstuck. And so we really want to retrain our thoughts. And it's important that you try to journal this out to start with until it becomes more automatic. So if we retrain our thought and we say, I'm trying to parent in the middle of a pandemic or work in the middle of a pandemic, if we say, I am, and that is stressful, but I'm strong and I'm capable and I can change things if I want. If we say that instead of my life is so hard, then you notice down here at the bottom, the circumstances didn't change. Whatever you want to write here doesn't change, but the thought changes. And then we become more hopeful and optimistic, and we start to get to work and things start to change as a result, right? Here's the thing I want to point out to you. You're not going to wake up tomorrow just because I introduced this to you and say, you know what, she was right. I am strong and I am capable and I can change things if I want. And you go from that circumstance to that thought. You're not going to do that. You're still going to think your thought, whether it's my life is so hard or this is not fair, whatever you normally think, that's so ingrained in you, you're going to think that tomorrow. But when you do, then that's when you just catch yourself and you say, you know what though, Abby, I am strong and I am capable and I can change things if I want. She's right. So here's what I'm going to do. And so it's not that you're eliminating the negative thought. It's that you're coaching yourself through the thought and you're coming up with a new thought that's more helpful. And I hope that helps you. I know it seems very simplified and it seems like that's not going to be helpful, but it has changed my life and it's changed the lives of people I've worked with. Let me see. Yeah, some people say suck it up, buttercup. I heard that a lot as a child. All right, thoughts on something other than journaling. Okay, so Diane, I tell people that if you just make a note in your app, like your notes app in your phone, so not that you have to write, these long, lengthy, amazing words, because there's a lot of writer fatigue, right? And cognitive load, especially when you're working at a university, we can not want to add one more thing on our plate. Just make it as simple as you can. And let the goal be that the writing is not good. Don't self-edit yourself when you're writing this stuff down. Make bullet points. Don't use complete sentences. Make it as intentionally messy as you can so it doesn't feel like work. And, just jot it down on a scrap sheet of paper, put it in your notes app, and try not to self-edit, because when we write for a living, we tend to edit our thoughts as we're writing, and that wears us out. And I say that as someone who's working on my doctorate, because I'm kind of in that fatigue myself. I hope that helps. We sometimes think journaling needs to be a fancy calligraphy pen and a fancy journal, and I think we need to make it a little more accessible. So drink in moderation. Again, I like to put this in here because we know that rates of alcohol consumption have been on the rise this year, because again, people are seeking out ways to celebrate, but also to self-medicate some. So I think it's important just to do everything in moderation, and to be really mindful of when we're starting to reach for food or alcohol for comfort, because that is sometimes a more natural reaction, but it can be unhelpful and unhealthy in the long run. So have something on the horizon. I think what has really, been difficult about the pandemic is that the things we looked forward to have been on pause for so long. And we keep getting told, in 2 weeks or 6 weeks or, next month it's going to be better. And we're kind of at that exhaustion phase of whether we are trying to carry on with some semblance of normalcy, but also trying to respect all of the new protocols and mandates. And so it can be hard, but I want to encourage you to find something on the horizon to look forward to. So in non-COVID times, it might look like going out every 2 weeks, going out every 2 months for, an extended weekend getaway, or every 2 years going out for a week or a vacation. That's the typical on the horizon rule. But I would say just to try to plan something, 3 to 4 times a year, once a quarter, something to look forward to. And it can be completely free, or it could be something that's inexpensive. It doesn't have to be, a Disney vacation or a beach trip. It could simply be, a lunch date by yourself or a lunch date with a friend, when it's safe to do so. It can be very simple, but it needs to be something that feels good for you, and it's something that you look forward to. And that is something I think that has really impacted our mental well-being this past year, as we've stopped planning for and hoping for things. And that is what makes our human experience so amazing. So start planning and dreaming and hoping again. And I think you'll see a big improvement in your mood. Here are some useful resources. These are just some things that I personally like to use. Headspace and the Motivation app, Getting Outdoors. I like Yoga with Adrienne on YouTube, and the Totally Stress Free on Spotify playlist. And then this 5-4-3-2-1 technique, which is a grounding exercise. I think that's a really helpful one. You can Google all of these, or if you would like this presentation, just let us know and we can get that to you. Nikki Bush will probably send it out if you'd like to get this. And then I just want to leave you with this little quote. I'm not going to read it to you, but feel free to take a screenshot. Laura Casey does a lot around productivity and habit change for people. She has some products and podcasts and books and things. And peonies are my favorite flower. And what she always says is that, peonies grow through the dirt, and so do we. And so the thing that I've learned through studying mental health and resilience and stress and coping is that we really have to have those trials and those struggles and those challenges to, build our capacity for resilience and improve our mental health. And so if you feel like you're struggling right now, just know that you're growing, just like these peonies are growing. You're growing too, and the end result is going to be so rewarding. But just know that small progress is still progress, and we're striving for progress, not perfection, in all that we do. And so I hope that that's somewhat inspiring for you. And then just, of course, always remember that finding balance looks different for everyone. So these are the stacked stones or Karens that I talked about, and they're all in balance, but they're all in balance in different ways. And so try not to compare your journey to someone else's, because we all are very different. We'd love for you to follow us on social media. Ashley Bowman does a wonderful job of managing our social for us, and we'd love for you to follow us there. I write blog posts that accompany these talks, and so we'd love for you to interact with us in these spaces. And if you're interested in being coached by me, if you want health or life coaching, please just reach out and we'll be happy to set up an appointment for you. These are free sessions that are available to you as a UA employee. So I would love to take some time for questions. I know we're close to our time, but I will stay over. And so please stay over if you like, but if you need to go, we certainly understand that too. All right, I got a question and answer that just said it was an excellent presentation and helpful. Thank you. I appreciate the feedback. I want this to be helpful and practical for y'all. Okay. Okay, perfect. Kathy, if you'll send me an email, because this chat will go away. If you'll send me an email, I'll be happy to get it to you. Boxed breathing is the technique, Adele, and the 2 TED Talks are How to Make Stress Your Friend and something like The Power of Mindset by Carol Dweck. If you put Carol Dweck and TED Talks in the search, you'll find her. Ashley, thanks so much. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Yes, the recording will be available for viewing, and we would love for you to share it out with your coworkers. It'll be on the wellness.ua.edu site, and so you'll be able to get it there. Awesome, Michelle. Thanks. I appreciate the feedback. Yeah, any other questions? Was this kind of what you were expecting when you came to a wellness talk on mental health? Let's see. Ooh, I scooched the slides. Email, it's abby.horton@ua.edu. Let me put it back on that slide. There you go. Thanks so much for your feedback. Oh, thanks, Meredith. I'm so glad you've attended more than one. I appreciate that. Thanks, Diane. Thanks, Austin. Sadia. Awesome. All right. Yeah, I think we all, Austin, I think we all focus on the things that feel hard. That's kind of our natural go-to. We want to fix the hard, but sometimes we just have to focus on the things we can control. Thanks for sharing it, Melissa. Awesome. All right. Oh, thanks, Heather. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Seeing some of my friends on here that I recognize. We're all friends here. I'm so glad that y'all were able to carve out some time in your Wednesday to join us. And again, if you need anything, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to share resources. And there's tons of old archive presentations on the wellness site from the past year. Any of the silver linings of COVID have been that we've been able to put these presentations on for y'all, add some more content and make it available online. And so always want to think about the positives, even when we've had some challenges. So I'm so glad that the Wellness Office was able to make this work for y'all this year. All right, well, I don't want to keep you, but I'm so thankful for you. I hope you have a great rest of your day and roll time. Bye, guys.